The counter felt less like a workspace and more like a crumbling fortification. He was leaning too far over the formica, his smile a little too wide, his insistence that I just give him a chance, grating against my last nerve like sandpaper. It was the end of a double shift, and my patience had evaporated hours ago. "Come on," he pressed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Just one drink. I'm a nice guy." The lie spilled out before I could stop it, a desperate, clumsy shield. "I can't. I'm waiting for my girlfriend." The air in the diner instantly thickened. His smile didn't drop, but it froze, the warmth draining out of it. "Oh, really?" he said, settling onto the stool with terrifying permanence. "I've got time. I'll wait to meet her." The diner at this hour operates on a specific, exhausting frequency. You can hear the refrigerator humming a low, dying note that vibrates in your teeth, a constant reminder of the machinery keeping this place alive. The air always smells like a heavy suspension of wet wool, burnt coffee, and rain, a scent that clings to your hair and clothes long after you leave, marking you as part of the late-night service class. I was drowning in it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped flies, exposing every exhausted line on my face, bleaching the color out of the world. My feet throbbed in rhythm with the flickering neon sign outside, a dull, rhythmic ache that had become my baseline existence. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to shed my skin. I wanted to peel off the grease-stained apron, scrub the scent of short-order cooking from my pores, and dissolve into the dark. But he was the obstacle blocking the exit. He wasn't aggressive, not in the way that justifies calling security. He was worse. He was the nice guy, the one who believes his patronage buys him shares in your personal life. He wore a suit that cost more than my rent, but he tipped in unsolicited advice rather than cash. He possessed that specific, suffocating brand of entitlement that comes from never hearing the word no, without viewing it as the start of a negotiation. He watched me wipe down the counter with a predatory patience, his eyes tracking the movement of my hands, the tuck of hair behind my ear. It felt like being hunted by a golden retriever that doesn't know its own strength, cloying, heavy, and impossible to shake without looking like the villain. He leaned in, encroaching on the employee-only space, his cologne, something musky and aggressively masculine, invading my personal bubble. It was a power move disguised as intimacy, a way of saying he could be wherever he wanted. Then there was table 4, the only anchor in the room. Arya sat there every Tuesday and Thursday, a shadow in a room full of glare. She never spoke much, just ordered black coffee and sparkling water, her voice low and smooth, like a cello string being plucked in an empty hall. She wasn't like the others. She didn't look at her phone, and she didn't look at the door. She looked at the room. She watched the ecosystem of the diner with a terrifying stillness, her eyes dark and intelligent, missing nothing. She was wearing a charcoal coat tonight, tailored sharp enough to cut glass, draped over the back of the vinyl booth. Even from here, she radiated a different frequency. If the guy at the counter was static noise, loud, chaotic, demanding, Arya was a silence so deep it felt heavy. She had been there for an hour, turning the pages of a hardcover book, but I felt her attention snap to me the moment the guy leaned in. It wasn't intrusive. It felt calibrating, like a security camera that had suddenly focused its lens on a disturbance. I had served her 100 times. I knew she tipped 40% consistently. I knew she smelled like cedar and something crisp, like expensive stationery. But we had never crossed the professional line. She was the quiet regular, the one safe point on the map. I caught her gaze now, just for a second, over the guy's shoulder. She hadn't looked up from her book, but her hand had stopped moving the page. Her posture suggested she owned the chair, the table, maybe the whole building. It was a stark contrast to his slouching entitlement. Where he spilled over his boundaries, she contained her energy, conserving it. The tension in the room was a physical weight, a triangle drawn between his aggression, my rising panic, and her absolute, grounded stillness. The clock on the wall clicked over, Shift change. The relief should have been immediate, the freedom of the exit door calling my name, but the trap had already snapped shut. The guy checked his watch, his grin widening as he spun the sugar dispenser on the counter. He wasn't leaving. He was going to walk me to my car, or worse, insist on verifying this imaginary partner I had conjured. I untied my apron, my hands shaking slightly. The fabric felt heavy, wet with the humidity of the kitchen. I wasn't just tired anymore. I was cornered, and the only witness was a woman who had never said more than 10 words to me. I clocked out with the mechanical finality of a prison door slamming shut. The time card punched my freedom into existence. 11:47 p.m. But the weight of the apron still clung to my hips as I untied it. The fabric was damp, heavy with the night's accumulation of grease and sweat. Shedding it felt like peeling off a second skin that had grown too tight. I folded it with ritualistic precision, a small act of control in a night that had spun beyond my grasp. My hands were shaking. The guy was waiting by the door. He had positioned himself with the strategic patience of a predator who knows its prey has no other exit. His suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened to project approachable, after-hours casualness that felt more threatening than his earlier formality. He wasn't blocking the door, not exactly. He was leaning against the frame, one hand resting on the push bar, his body language screaming, "I'm just being friendly," while his eyes said, "You're not leaving until I say so." "Ready?" he asked, his voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "I'll walk you to your car." The panic crystallized in my throat, sharp and metallic. My lie, meant to be a shield, had become a cage. I had invented a girlfriend to create a barrier he couldn't cross, but instead it had given him a reason to stay, to verify, to prove me a liar. Because in his world, women who worked late shifts in diners didn't have partners waiting for them. We were waiting to be chosen. "She's running late," I managed. "Traffic." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. The skepticism was subtle, a slight tilt of his head. "Funny, I haven't seen you on your phone all night. No texts, no calls. You'd think she'd let you know." The trap snapped shut. He was right. I had been so careful in my invisibility that I had forgotten to perform the basic mechanics of having a life outside these walls. No phone buzzing, no furtive glances at a screen, no half smile at a message from someone who loved me. I had erased myself so thoroughly that my own lie was transparent. He leaned closer, his cologne enveloping me like a chemical weapon. "Look, I'm not trying to be a creep," he said, the words of every creep who ever lived. "I just think honesty's important. If you're not interested, you can just say so. No need for stories." The rage flared, hot and sudden, mixing with the panic. He was making me the villain. I was the liar. I was the one being unreasonable. His entitlement was so absolute that my attempt at self-preservation was an affront to his ego. My hand tightened on my bag strap. The diner was empty now. It was just me, him, and the humming refrigerator. That's when I saw the shadow move. Table 4. Aria had closed her book. The sound was soft, barely audible, just the whisper of paper on paper. But in the charged silence of the diner, it was a gunshot. She stood, her movement fluid and unhurried, like water finding its level. She shrugged into her charcoal coat, the fabric falling into place with a whisper that sounded expensive. She didn't look at us, not directly. She just collected her things, her coffee cup, her book, her keys. But the way she moved was a message. Deliberate, controlled. A woman who knew exactly where she was going. She walked toward the door, her boots making no sound on the linoleum, and suddenly, the space around the guy felt smaller. His confident slouch against the frame looked less like casual dominance and more like a child blocking a doorway. He didn't see her yet. He was too focused on me, on his victory, on the thrill of cornering me into an admission. But I saw her. I saw her dark eyes flick to mine just for a second over his shoulder. And in that second, I saw a question there. A silent, steady inquiry that bypassed all the noise. "Do you need this?" I didn't know how to answer. I was too deep in my own panic, too tangled in the web I'd spun. But the question itself was a lifeline. Because someone was paying attention. Someone had been watching. And someone was moving toward us with a purpose that had nothing to do with coffee and everything to do with the claim she was about to make. Arya moved through the stagnant air like water finding a crack in stone. Fluid, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. She didn't hurry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked toward the door where the guy had positioned himself like a gatekeeper to my freedom. Her boots made no sound on the linoleum, but her presence was a physical weight that pressed against the back of my neck. I could smell her before she reached us. Not perfume, but something clean and expensive, like cedar and crisp paper from a high-end stationery shop. The scent cut through the greasy diner air and the guy's overpowering cologne, clearing a path. She stopped just behind his shoulder, close enough that her charcoal coat almost brushed his suit. The guy finally turned, his confident smirk flickering as he registered who stood there. He didn't see a savior. He saw a woman who, by every metric of posture and presence, outranked him completely. "That's my table," Arya said. Her voice was low, smooth, and absolute. Not a question, not a request. A statement of fact that rewrote the entire room's geography. The guy's expression flickered through several emotions in quick succession. Confusion, indignation, then a kind of dawning recognition that he had misread the situation entirely. He didn't shrink from aggression. He shrank from authority. From the quiet certainty in Arya's dark eyes that said she knew things he didn't, that she moved in circles where his suit was just costume jewelry. He stepped aside, not because she pushed, but because she existed in a way that made his posturing seem suddenly, embarrassingly small. Arya's hand found the small of my back. The touch was deliberate, proprietary, and it burned through my thin t-shirt like a brand. Her fingers were warm, her palms steady, and the contact was so unexpected that my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the casual, invasive touch of a stranger. This was a performance, and she was committing to it with every cell in her body. "Ready?" she asked, her voice pitched only for me, but loud enough for him to hear. The word was heavy with implication. Ready to leave. Ready to be claimed. Ready for whatever came next. I could only nod, my voice having abandoned me entirely. Arya guided me forward, her hand a constant grounding pressure. The guy was already backing away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender that came too late to mean anything. "Didn't realize," he mumbled, his voice losing its earlier polish. "My mistake." Arya didn't acknowledge him. Her focus was entirely on me, on the path she was clearing through the night. She pushed the door open with her free hand, and the cool night air hit my face like a baptism. The street was quiet, the rain having stopped, leaving the pavement gleaming under the streetlights. We stepped out together, and the door swung shut behind us, cutting off the diner's hum and the guy's sputtered apologies. The silence between us was immediate and heavy. Arya's hand remained on my back, a steady pressure that felt less like rescue and more like possession. The touch that had felt like salvation inside now felt like a question mark pressed against my spine. Was she still performing? Had she ever been? The adrenaline that had been holding me up began to crash, leaving my legs shaky and my hands trembling. She didn't release me until we reached her car, a sleek, dark thing parked under the lone streetlight. Then her hand dropped away, and the absence of her touch was as startling as its presence had been. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "The offer stands," she said, her voice still low, still intimate. "The girlfriend thing, if you need it to." The words hung between us, suspended in the cool night air. An offer of protection that was also a question, a door opening that might lead to a cage or to freedom. I couldn't tell which. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird that didn't know whether it had been freed or merely transferred to a different captor. Arya waited, patient and still, for my answer. The car door closed with a soft, decisive click that sealed us inside a different world. The leather interior smelled of expensive hide and something else. Cedar, maybe, or the ghost of some cologne that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The silence was immediate and absolute, a stark contrast to the diner's constant hum. Outside, the city continued its restless pulse, but in here, everything slowed. The dashboard glowed with a soft blue light that illuminated Arya's profile in sharp relief. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, long fingers relaxed, the silver ring on her index finger catching the light. She didn't start the engine immediately. She just sat, letting the quiet settle around us like a blanket. My hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had been holding me upright in the diner was draining away fast, leaving my legs weak and my stomach hollow. I pressed my palms against my thighs, hoping the pressure would stop the trembling, but it only made it more noticeable. The reality of what had just happened was starting to hit me. Not the rescue, but the performance. The way Arya had touched me, the proprietary weight of her hand on my back, the absolute certainty in her voice when she claimed me. It had felt real. That was the terrifying part. It had felt more real than anything I'd faked in the past 5 minutes. Arya turned to face me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "You can breathe now," she said softly. The words were gentle, but they landed like a command. I realized I'd been holding my breath. The air rushed out of me in a shaky exhale that sounded too loud in the enclosed space. She watched me, those dark eyes tracking every flicker of emotion across my face. "He's gone. He won't bother you again tonight." "Thank you," I managed, my voice coming out rough and thin. "You didn't have to—" "I know," she interrupted, "but I wanted to." The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. She wasn't dropping the act completely, but she was letting me see behind the curtain. "I've been watching him watch you for weeks. The Tuesday and Thursday routine, the way he times his arrival with the end of your shift, the way he studies your schedule like it's a puzzle he thinks he's entitled to solve." The words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "You notice that?" "I notice everything," she said simply. There was no arrogance in it, just a statement of fact. "That's my table. I sit there because it's the best vantage point. I can see the door, the counter, the kitchen. I can see who comes in and who leaves. I can see patterns." She paused, her fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the steering wheel. "I saw his pattern. I saw yours. The way you deflect with polite smiles. The way you create invisible walls with your posture. The way you make yourself small when he walks in." The accuracy of her observation made me feel naked. All those defense mechanisms I'd thought were subtle, all the ways I'd tried to make myself invisible. She'd seen them all. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, the question coming out smaller than I intended. "Because you didn't ask," she replied. "Because stepping in uninvited is just another form of taking up space. I was waiting for a signal. For you to look at me like you looked at me tonight, like you were drowning and wanted someone to throw you a line." Her gaze held mine, unflinching. "You gave me the signal." The car felt smaller suddenly, the space between us charged with a different kind of tension. Not the predator-prey dynamic from the diner, but something more complicated. She had been watching me, yes, but not in the way he had. His watching was consumption. Hers was observation. He wanted to take. She had waited to be invited. The distinction was subtle, but seismic. "So what now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Do we just drive around until I feel safe enough to go home?" Arya's smile was barely there, just a slight curve at the corner of her mouth. "Something like that." She turned the key in the ignition, and the engine purred to life. A low, expensive sound that vibrated through the leather seats. I find that motion helps. When you're stuck, physically or otherwise, movement creates options. She pulled away from the curb, and the diner receded in the rearview mirror, its neon sign bleeding red and blue into the wet street. We drove through the sleeping city, past closed storefronts and empty bus stops. The rain had stopped, leaving everything gleaming and reflective. Arya drove with the same deliberate calm she brought to everything, her hands steady on the wheel, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of unasked questions and unspoken answers. I watched her profile in the passing streetlights, noticing details I'd never allowed myself to see before. The way her dark hair fell against her collar, the straight line of her nose, the determined set of her jaw. She wasn't beautiful in a conventional way. She was compelling. A woman who made you look twice, not because she demanded attention, but because she held it so effortlessly. "You're thinking," she said, breaking the silence. "I can hear it." I laughed, the sound surprising both of us. "Is that another thing you notice?" "Occupational hazard," she replied, but didn't elaborate on what that occupation was. "You're wondering if this is real, if I'm real, if you can trust any of this." I didn't deny it. "Something like that." "Good," she said, her voice low and steady. "Question everything, especially the things that feel like rescue." She glanced at me, just for a second, but her eyes were serious. "I'm not a savior. I'm just a woman who was tired of watching a predator circle his prey. But I'm also a woman who saw something in you that I wanted to know better. The question is, are you willing to let me?" The question hung between us, suspended in the charged air of the car. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my ribs. "I don't know," I admitted, the honesty feeling like a risk. "I'm not used to being watched without being consumed." Arya's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, the leather creaking under her grip. "That's the difference," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "I've been watching you for months, but I wasn't waiting for a weakness. I was waiting for you to see me seeing you." "Why?" I asked, the word coming out smaller than I intended. "Why me?" She didn't answer immediately. Her profile in the passing streetlights was stark and elegant. The straight line of her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the way her dark hair fell against the collar of her coat. "Because you understand the language of deflection," she said finally. "The way you make yourself small, the way you redirect with a smile, the way you build invisible walls. I speak that language fluently." "You're not a waitress." "No," she agreed. "I'm a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracing patterns of fraud, following money trails that people don't want found. I notice when someone's hiding something because I do it for a living." She glanced at me, just for a second, but her eyes were serious. "You were hiding. But you weren't hiding something illegal. You were hiding yourself." "So when I said I was waiting for my girlfriend, you weren't just deflecting him," she interrupted. "You were telling a truth you didn't know you were telling. The lie felt safer because the truth is terrifying." Arya pulled the car over, suddenly, smoothly, into a darkened parking lot overlooking the city. She turned off the engine and the silence rushed in to fill the space. She turned to face me, her dark eyes catching the distant city lights. "That you want to be claimed," she said, the words low and deliberate. "Not by a predator who sees you as prey, but by someone who sees the walls and wants to know what's behind them." The air in the car thickened, charged with a different kind of electricity. "I wished the lie were true," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every Tuesday and Thursday I watched you work. I watched you handle difficult customers with grace. I watched you move through the room like you were trying not to disturb the air. And I wished I could walk in and say, 'That's my table,' and have it mean something real." The power dynamic between us shifted. No longer waitress and customer, but two women in a charged space, each measuring the other. "Why didn't you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Because you weren't ready to be seen," she replied. "And I wasn't ready to be the person who needed to be seen by you." Her hands rested on the steering wheel, long fingers relaxed, the silver ring on her index finger catching the ambient light. I noticed details I'd never allowed myself to see before. The way her knuckles were slightly scarred, as if she'd fought for something once. The precise way her nails were trimmed, short and practical. The faint tan line where a watch usually sat. These were the hands of someone who worked, who fought, Who built things. So what now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Arya's smile was barely there, just a slight curve at the corner of her mouth. Now we stop pretending, she said. The lie served its purpose. It got him to leave. But I'm not interested in playing a role. I'm interested in the woman behind the apron. The air in the car felt heavier, thick with unsaid desires and the weight of possibilities. We were no longer in the diner's ecosystem, no longer bound by the rules of customer and server. We were just two women in a dark car, having a conversation that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Tell me something real," she said, her voice low and intimate. Not a deflection, not a polite smile. Something true. I looked at her, at the way the city lights painted her profile in gold and shadow, at the way her dark eyes held mine without flinching. "I'm terrified," I admitted, the words feeling like they were being pulled from my throat. Terrified that this is just another performance. Terrified that I'll believe it's real and then wake up alone. Arya's hand moved from the steering wheel to my knee, a deliberate, grounding touch. "I don't perform intimacy," she said, her voice firm and steady. "I either feel it or I don't. And I've felt you since the first time you poured my coffee without asking if I wanted room for cream, because you remembered I always drink it black." The specificity of the memory made my breath catch. She'd been paying attention, not consuming, observing. The distinction was everything. "So what do we do?" I asked, my hand moving to cover hers on my knee, the touch tentative but deliberate. "We write a new script," she said, her thumb tracing a slow pattern on my leg. One with no audience, no performance, just two women who are tired of being alone. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of consent, of questions being asked and answered without words. The car felt like a sanctuary, a space outside of time where the rules didn't apply. "Take me somewhere," I said, the words feeling like the first honest thing I'd said all night. Arya's smile widened, just slightly. "I know a place." She started the engine and we pulled back onto the road, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. The conversation had shifted from rescue to recognition, from performance to possibility. The lie had been necessary because the truth was terrifying. But the truth was here now, sitting next to me, driving with one hand on the wheel and the other still resting on my knee. A quiet claim that felt more real than any touch I'd ever known. Arya pulled into a darkened overlook, the city sprawling below us like a fallen constellation. She killed the engine, and the silence rushed in, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the cooling tick of the car. We were alone up here, isolated on the edge of the world, two women awake in a city that had gone to sleep. The lights blurred into streaks of gold and amber, painting her profile in sharp relief. She turned to face me, her dark eyes catching the glow from below, and for the first time all night, I felt the weight of being truly seen. "I watched you handle the Henderson party last month," she said, her voice low and intimate in the enclosed space. 6 people, all drunk, all demanding separate checks with split appetizers. You didn't flinch. You just moved through it like water around rocks, adjusting, accommodating, but never breaking. The specificity of the memory made my breath catch. I barely remembered that night, just another blur of exhaustion, but she had cataloged it. She had seen me. "It wasn't just efficiency," she continued, her hand still resting on my knee, a warm anchor. "It was the way you kept your shoulders back, even when they were leering. The way you made eye contact with the woman at the end of the table who was clearly uncomfortable with her date's behavior. You gave her a look, just a flicker, that said, 'I see you too.'" I had forgotten that moment. The woman had left early, her boyfriend too drunk to notice. I had cleared her plate and found a $20 tip with a note scribbled on a napkin. "Thanks for the escape route." "That's what I noticed first," Arya said, her thumb tracing a slow pattern on my leg. "Not your smile, not your body, though I noticed those later. It was your focus. The way you make people feel like they're the only person in the room, even when you're juggling 6 tables and a cook who's screaming about modifiers." The compliment landed differently than any I'd received. Men had told me I was pretty, that I had a nice smile, that they liked my laugh. They'd commented on my body, my eyes, the way I filled out my uniform. But no one had ever seen the work. No one had seen the hidden fire required to smile through exhaustion, to remain kind when you wanted to scream, to make people feel seen when you felt invisible. Thursday nights were my favorite, she admitted, her gaze dropping to my hands, which were still trembling slightly in my lap. You'd be dead on your feet by 9, but you'd still take the time to learn the new busboy's name. You'd still remember that Mrs. Peterson likes her tea with honey, not sugar. You'd still find the energy to ask me about my book, even though I always gave you the same one-word answer. Because you were reading the same book for 3 weeks, I said, the memory surfacing. I thought you weren't actually reading it. I was, she said, a slight smile playing at her lips. I was just more interested in watching you work than in turning the page. The air in the car thickened, heavy with unsaid desires and the weight of revelations. The pretend relationship we had performed for the guy's benefit suddenly felt more intimate than any real relationship I'd ever had. The way she had touched my back, the proprietary weight of her hand, the absolute certainty in her voice when she claimed me. It had all been a performance, but it had tapped into something real. A chemistry I hadn't allowed myself to feel because I was too busy surviving. I've had relationships, I found myself saying, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Real ones, with real girlfriends, and none of them ever saw me the way you just described. Arya's expression softened, the professional mask dropping away completely. That's because they were looking for a partner. I was looking for you. The distinction was subtle but seismic. Partner was a role. You was a person. She had been watching not to fill a space in her life, but to understand the shape of mine. The tension coiled tight between us, a string pulled so taut it was humming. Every shared glance, every accidental touch, every revelation was another twist, tightening it further. I was exhausted from the constant vigilance, from the war being waged inside me between my wounded past and this terrifying, beautiful present. Arya's hand moved from my knee to my face, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a tenderness that made my soul ache. "The question is," she whispered, her voice husky with an emotion I couldn't dare to name, "are you ready to stop performing?" My heart did a slow, heavy tumble in my chest. This feeling, this terrifying, hopeful freefall, was exactly what I'd been running from. But looking at Arya, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. And for the first time in a very long time, I wanted to be seen. "Yes," I said, the word barely audible but absolute. "Then let me take you home," she replied, her thumb brushing my lower lip. "My home. And we'll see what happens when there are no more lies to hide behind." Arya started the engine, but we didn't move immediately. She turned to me, her expression shifting into something playful, dangerous. "So," she said, her voice low, "how long have we been together?" The question landed like a dare. I stared at her, my brain scrambling to catch up. "What?" "The backstory," she clarified, her fingers tapping a rhythm on the steering wheel. "If we're going to sell this, we need details. How did we meet? What's our anniversary? Do we have a song?" Her smile was barely there, just a slight curve at the corner of her mouth, but her eyes were serious. This was a test. I swallowed hard, my pulse kicking up. 6 months?" I offered weakly. "Too vague," Arya dismissed, shifting in her seat to face me fully. The movement closed the distance between us, her knee brushing mine. 6 months ago, you spilled coffee on me at the diner. I came in every Tuesday after that, hoping you'd be working. I started ordering black coffee because I noticed that's what you drank on your breaks." She paused, watching my reaction. "I memorized your schedule. I know you take your smoke break at 2:15, even though you don't smoke. You just stand outside and breathe." The specificity of her observation made my breath catch. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything," she repeated, but this time it felt less like a statement of fact and more like a confession. "Your favorite pen is the blue Pilot G2. You always tuck it behind your ear when you're thinking. You hum under your breath when you're refilling salt shakers. Something pop punk, I think. You hate the fluorescent lights so much you squint even when you're not looking at them. The details were overwhelming, intimate in a way that felt invasive and thrilling at once. That's a lot, I managed, my voice sounding strangled. That's what happens when you watch someone for 6 months, Arya said simply. You collect data points. You build a profile. You fall in love with the patterns. The word love hung between us, suspended in the charged air. I realized she wasn't just improvising anymore. She was telling me the truth, disguised as fiction, the way I had told the guy a lie disguised as protection. Okay, I said, my voice steadier now. 6 months. We met when I spilled coffee on you. You kept coming back. You always sat at table 4 because you could see the counter. And the kitchen, she added. I could see you arguing with Marco about the modifier system. I could see you rolling your eyes when the new busboy dropped a full tray. I could see the way your shoulders tightened every time he walked in. He didn't need clarification. I started timing my visits to coincide with the end of your shift, not to harass you, to be there. Just in case. Just in case what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. In case you needed someone to claim you, she said, her voice low and deliberate. In case you got tired of being invisible. The physical distance between us had closed without me noticing. We were turned toward each other fully now, our knees touching, our faces inches apart. The city lights outside blurred into streaks of gold, but in here, everything was sharp and focused. Arya's hand found mine on the center console, her fingers tracing the lines of my palm like she was reading a map. What's our song? She asked, her thumb brushing my wrist. If we have one. I thought about it, my brain spinning. I will follow you into the dark, I suggested, half joking, half terrified. Arya's smile widened, just slightly. Too on the nose, she teased, but I'll allow it. What about our first fight? We don't fight, I said automatically, then realized how revealing that was. I mean, we haven't yet. Because I've been watching from a distance, she supplied. Because I've been building a profile instead of building a life with you. Because I've been a coward. The word coward surprised me. You don't seem like a coward. Fear isn't always loud, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to observe instead of act. To memorize someone's schedule instead of asking them out. To wait for a crisis instead of creating an opportunity. Her fingers tightened around mine. I'm done waiting. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implication. The car felt smaller, the air thicker. I realized I didn't want to stop playing the role. I wanted to commit to the bit. I wanted to make the lie real. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Arya leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. Now we stop pretending, she whispered, and we see what happens when we finally tell the truth. The silence stretched until it became a physical thing, a taut wire humming between us. Arya's hand remained on mine, her thumb tracing slow, deliberate patterns on my palm. The city lights outside had blurred into meaningless streaks. In here, everything was sharp and focused. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic rhythm that seemed to echo in the enclosed space. This was the precipice, the moment before the fall. I wasn't acting, Arya said quietly, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade through silk. When I touched your back in the diner. When I said, "That's my table," I wasn't performing a role. I was telling a truth I'd been rehearsing for months. The confession landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through my chest. I turned to face her fully, our knees still touching, our faces inches apart. Her eyes were dark, reflecting the distant city lights, and for the first time, I saw something vulnerable behind the confident mask. "You don't understand," I whispered, my voice raw. "I've been pretending for so long, pretending to be okay, pretending to be invisible, pretending I don't want things I can't have. I don't know how to tell the difference anymore." Arya's other hand moved to my face, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a tenderness that made my entire body ache. The touch was deliberate, intentional. nothing like the accidental brush of knees from before. This was a question, an offering, a quiet surrender. "Then let me show you," she said, her voice husky with an emotion I couldn't name. "The difference between performance and reality is consent. The difference between being claimed and being rescued is choice." She leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back. The space between us closed inch by inch, her breath warm against my lips. I could smell the cedar scent of her coat, the faint trace of coffee on her breath, the clean smell of rain still clinging to her hair. This wasn't the rushed, desperate kiss of a performance. This was a question, and my answer was yes. Our lips met, and the world narrowed to this single point of contact. It was slow and deep, tasting of rainwater and something woodsy, and a longing so profound it felt like coming home. The walls I had so carefully built, the fortress I had hidden inside for so long, didn't just crumble. They dissolved into dust. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, Arya rested her forehead against mine. "I didn't intervene because you needed saving," she whispered, her lips brushing mine with each word. "I intervened because I couldn't stand the thought of him touching what I wanted to claim." The shift was seismic. I was no longer the victim waiting for rescue. I was the woman being offered something real, and the choice was mine. I could retreat back into my shell, thank her politely, and disappear into the night. Or I could step out of the victim role and into the pursuer role. I chose. My hand moved to the back of her neck, my fingers tangling in her dark hair. I pulled her back to me. This time I was the one asking the question, seeking confirmation, demanding consent. She gave it with a soft sigh against my lips. "Your place or mine?" she asked when we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard. "Yours," I answered without hesitation. "I want to see where the woman who bought the theater lives." Arya's smile was brilliant in the dim light, transforming her face from serious to radiant. "I was hoping you'd say that." She started the engine. We pulled onto the road, city lights guiding us toward a destination that felt like the beginning of everything real. The performance was over. The mutual claim had begun. I watched her profile in the passing streetlights, the determined set of her jaw, the way her dark hair fell against her collar, and I knew this was no longer a rescue. This was a beginning. The lie had been necessary because the truth was terrifying. But the truth was here now, sitting next to me, driving with one hand on the wheel and the other reaching for mine. I took her hand. We drove into night. Arya's neighborhood was a quiet collection of brownstones, the kind where the rent cost more than most people's mortgage. The car glided to a stop in front of a building with ivy climbing the brick facade, windows glowing warm against the dark. She killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt like a held breath. Neither of us moved. The space between us was charged, humming with the question of what came next. "The suit," I said, breaking the quiet. "He was the catalyst, wasn't he?" Arya's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, then relaxed. "He was a problem that needed solving, but he wasn't the point." "The point was you," I said, turning to face her, waiting for an excuse to stop watching and start acting. Her gaze held mine, unflinching. "The point was you, learning your patterns, memorizing your schedule, falling for the way you make everyone feel like they're the only person in the room." Her hand found mine on the center console, her thumb tracing slow circles on my palm. The suit gave me a reason to stop observing and start participating. The compliment landed differently than any I'd received. Not about my appearance, but about the essence of who I was. The work I did, the care I took, the invisible labor that made me good at my job. She saw it all, and she valued it. "I've spent so long making myself small," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "So long pretending I didn't want things I couldn't have. And I've spent so long watching from a distance," Arya replied, her voice husky with emotion. "So long afraid that stepping forward would make me just another person taking up space in your life." We sat in the quiet, the city sleeping around us. The car felt like a bubble outside of time, A space where the rules didn't apply. Where a waitress and a regular could become something else. Where a lie could become truth. Where rescue could become partnership. "Tell me something real," I said, echoing her earlier request. Arya's smile was barely there, just a curve at the corner of her mouth. "I'm terrified too. Terrified that you'll wake up tomorrow and realize I'm just another complication. Terrified that the performance felt safer than the reality." Her vulnerability was a gift, a crack in her flawless facade that let me see the person behind the legend. This wasn't a billionaire sweeping in to save the day. This was a woman who had been lonely, who had been watching, who had been waiting for a sign. "You're not a complication," I said, my hand moving to cup her face. "You're the first real thing that's happened to me in years." Arya leaned into my touch, her eyes closing for a moment. When she opened them, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by something steadier. Resolve. "Then let's stop pretending. Let's stop performing. Let's just be." She opened her door, the cool night air rushing in. I followed, my legs shaky, but my steps certain. The brownstone loomed above us, ivy rustling in the breeze. Arya led me up the steps, her hand in mine, and I realized this was the threshold, the moment where the story ended and the new reality began. The quiet regular was no longer quiet. She was claiming what she had been watching for months, and I was letting her. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing out the world. No more lies, no more performances. Just the truth, terrifying and real, waiting to be written. The transformation from fear to empowerment happened in a diner booth, a car ride, and a quiet brownstone doorway. The quiet regular learned to speak, and the invisible waitress learned to be seen. If you've ever found safety in an unexpected person, let me know below. Subscribe for more stories of connection that defies expectation.